from the Middle East, I'd like to introduce to you a man whose, well, his suffering biblical. Job.
My name is Job. I was a very wealthy man, more than 11,000 livestock, well known in the community for my deeds. But tragedy struck me. I was asked to speak to you today because tragedy may well strike you. Tragedy may well have already struck you, or those that you love. And perhaps my story will in some way inspire you to hold on to God in the midst of great difficulty. It started with the loss of my wealth. One messenger after another came reporting this and that had happened, and it seemed that I had lost everything in a single day. Discomforting, of course, to lose all of that. One comes to rely on it. Even if one does not love wealth, one comes to rely on it. And so this was very difficult for me. But I realized that I came into this world with nothing. I shall go out with nothing. And so, physical possessions, while they do provide some measure of comfort, they are not truly the important things of life. But then I heard that my 7 sons and my 3 daughters had all been killed. Some sort of tornado or windstorm or something had taken them all. This is more than I could bear. Suffering beyond anything that I could have even imagined for myself or for anyone else. I've known those who've lost one child perhaps, and they're never the same. To lose all 10 in a single moment, crushing. And then came the boils. I became ill. I don't know, it was the stress of the situation or what, but I started breaking out in my head and all the way down to my foot. There was boils. I still have some of them, just they're not as bad as they were, but still. And my condition was such that when my wife looked at me, I could see that she was filled with revulsion. Terrible suffering. Now, she was just as crushed as I was about losing our children, and she did not take it in the way that I took it. Her suggestion was that I curse God and die. Well, I could not do that. Even though God may have looked the other way at this moment and allowed terrible suffering to come upon me, even though I didn't understand, I still could not see cursing the one who gave me birth, the one who created me, the one who created all of the world and all the good things in it. All the good things I had came from God, and so shall I not accept suffering as well as good? So I did not take her advice. Now I was very angry with God. Very angry. And I did not mind giving voice to my complaint. So I had 3 friends. They came to visit me when I was dealing with my suffering. And as they came and they sat with me for a while. And we didn't say anything for a while. It was good just to have someone to be with me. But then I spoke about how I really didn't want to be here anymore. With all the boils, with all the loss, all the lack of prospects in life, it just seemed pointless. I didn't want to live. In fact, I wished I had never been born. I don't know if that's the right sentiment or the wrong sentiment, but that's how I felt. As I said, I was very angry with God. But I did not abandon God, nor did I accuse God of anything doing wrong. That is not the way that I am, or the way that I could ever be. Well, my friends, they took exception to this. I don't know why. It seems to me that if someone is suffering, it might be best to just hear them out. Let them get it off their chest. Perhaps that would help them. But instead they chose to argue with me about it. To say that, perhaps you must have done something that brought this terrible thing upon you. Because, if God is good, and then God is in control of things, then if something bad happens, there must be a reason. It's not because God has just forgotten or fallen away or anything like that. It must be something else. Must be something else. Must be you. Must be something you've done. Well, couldn't think of anything. I really couldn't. I'd always tried my best to help people. Always tried my best to share what I had with others. So, it didn't make any sense to me. And I know that it's nice to be able to wrap everything up in a package with a bow and say, well, this is why suffering happens. So it's because you did this and the world's like that and so on. Well, it's not a neat package with a bow. Sometimes it doesn't make any sense at all. And that's certainly how I felt as I continued to suffer through this, and then had to suffer through the speaking of these three men who I'd come to love, but now the way they were speaking made no sense to me. At least they seemed to believe that I was accusing God in some way. If I was saying that I was innocent, and I didn't mean by that I was completely innocent, that I'd never done anything wrong in my entire life. That's not what I meant by that. But rather that I'd done my best. Done my best to do what I believed that God wanted us to do with our lives. Well, to me, that would mean that one should not be brought into terrible suffering. At least, that's what I used to think. But then I began to realize that, it might not be that way, because here I was suffering. And when you're in the midst of this actual suffering, you realize everything's not this neat package anymore, and sometimes things happen that don't make any sense. And so I tried to help my friends to understand that, here's the situation, that life is just this way. Sometimes we suffer and it doesn't make any sense. And that doesn't mean that God is wrong, and it doesn't mean that we are wrong. It's just that suffering occurs. Well, they just couldn't accept it. They continued to argue and argue and argue with me about it, making me feel as if somehow I must be in the wrong, that if suffering happens, that it must somehow be my fault. Well, I tell you, it is not my fault. I did not bring this upon myself. And yes, I know the world does bring terrible things from time to time, and I suppose that's simply what has come upon me. But I just could not accept that. And so I want you to know that while you will not suffer as I suffered, or at least I hope not, when you face suffering, know that there is still one who's in control of this universe, one that you can reach out to, one that you can speak to honestly. I was very angry with God, and I spoke very angrily with God. I told him exactly how I felt. Well, that's prayer to me, to say exactly what you think to God. Don't try to hide it, don't try to sugarcoat it, just give him the truth. He can take it. So when you face these difficult things, allow yourself to express those things to God. Allow yourself to express them to others. And when you face it this way, it gives a certain measure of comfort. And I know, ultimately, that God does listen, that we do have an opportunity to present a case before God. Now, perhaps you won't see it. Perhaps you won't get that opportunity the way I just said it. But I know that there is one, there has to be one, who can speak to God on our behalf. And when that one speaks on our behalf, he can speak to God like a mediator and present our case before God, and then there will be a final justice. Because ultimately, I do believe there will be justice. It's just that justice can take a long time. It may not even be seen in a person's lifetime, but there will be justice. And when I speak of this one, who I hope shall come, I call him Redeemer, because he is the one who shall speak on my behalf, the mediator, the one that buys me back from the sufferings that I go through. And I know that my Redeemer lives.